Hey everyone. I just wanted to pop on super quick and just sort of talk a little bit about what's been going on. For anyone following one of the cases in Canada right now, the Moran family, they've just been notified that there's been some questions about the documentation and the validity of some of their documents, and I guess someone came forward saying that their son wasn't adopted from an orphanage, he was adopted privately, which I know to be false. I've talked to Kim personally, and I know that's false. But basically the fact is that there's just some questions now that have been brought up that are making the Canadian government question whether or not the adoption was ethical. Now, here's the thing. What people need to understand, two things. First of all, this doesn't fall on the Canadian government's shoulders as them being bad guys, or as them, failing their citizens or anything like that. This is one area that I actually agree with the government and what they do. I just don't agree in the timeline of how they're doing it. But, and the second thing is this doesn't in any way reflect on the parents or the parents' knowledge even, the adoptive parents, because here's how it kind of works in developing nations. Adoption is often riddled with corruption. And even so, when you adopt from agencies, this is one of the reasons that we've always been afraid to do it, is because we've worked so much in developing nations and we've seen how it works. But there's so many opportunities from that, when that child is first either abandoned or picked up or bought, from that time to when they end up in the orphanage. There's so many opportunities for corruption to take place, for deception to take place with the biological family of the child, and just sort of for lies to come out. There's a lot of opportunities for that. Sometimes and often the orphanage is actually involved in it and is a huge player in the corruption and in the trafficking of children, and sometimes they're innocent in it, they don't know. But basically, the adoptive parents from Canada, when you're adopting from an agency, really the only exposure you have is you've hired an agency, and the agency is usually the one that is choosing who they deal with on the other end. So they'll choose the orphanages they deal with, they choose the systems, and they're sort of the ones that are supposed to kind of back check the orphanages, at least, to make sure that they're ethical. But there really isn't a way, unless those agencies are physically traveling to the countries of origin of these children and fact-checking for each child the story that's being given to them. There's no way to prove that there isn't any child trafficking. And so, saying that the investigations are redundant, or saying that the investigations are somehow offensive to Canadian families, and that onto the agencies and all these things, it isn't, because really the Canadian embassies the embassies in these countries know how these countries work, that there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of child trafficking, and that it's done without the international agencies even being aware of it. And so what they do then is that they want to investigate the adoptions to make sure that everything that they're being told is legitimate. So let's just give a scenario. So saying that a child was abandoned, you adopt a child and you've been told that your child was abandoned. They were brought to us, they were left on our doorstep at the orphanage, and we've had them since birth. And we haven't been able to find biological family. So you as adoptive parents would take that as face value. You would end up going to the agency would have that as their information. You go, you adopt. The orphanage is going to give you paperwork that says this is what happened to them. The court is going to see that and say, okay, that's what happened. There's no biological family. Great, you're the parents. Now, when the Canadian embassy is going to see that, and the reason I can speak to this is because I've seen every step of the process being here as an expat going through the adoption, because we have walked through every single step with our kids. And there's a lot more steps that should take place than just saying a child was abandoned and left in an orphanage. That's not how it happens in most of these countries. So basically what happens is that child, if they were in fact abandoned on anywhere, like found in a pit latrine or found in a field or whatever, they would be taken to a police station, not an orphanage. Very rarely would they ever be taken directly to an orphanage. That police station would have a police report writing down exactly what happened, who brought the child in, how old the child was, the circumstances around it, and if they were trying to find biological family. Then the police are the ones that generally take them to baby homes or orphanages. So if your orphanage or if your agency and the orphanage is telling you that your child was abandoned, ask for a police report, because there should be one showing that that child was abandoned, that the police brought them. If they don't have it, that's a red flag. You should be asking for something, for more proof that that child was abandoned, because Canada will. And now the other thing then that will happen is that after the child is placed in the care of the orphanage in very few countries is actually the one that will do all of the primary investigation. So there should be government officials. In Uganda, they're called probation officers. They might just be social workers, but they're government social workers who will actually investigate to make sure that there isn't any biological family that is waiting for that child or looking for that child. And so again, there should be another report somewhere from a government official that's outside the orphanage stating that. So when you get your pack from the orphanage, there should be something in there saying that there is in fact a government employee that has sought out the family and that there wasn't one, and they would also corroborate the story that the child was abandoned, that they were taken to the police station and then taken this baby home. If you're missing any of that and all you have is the orphanage saying that the baby was brought there, that is a red flag. And as soon as that's brought to an embassy, it's going to be a red flag for the embassy. Because if they work in that country, they know the workings of the countries. Or even if they just work in Africa, they know the workings of these countries. And that it's likely that there's been something weird. So they're going to start looking into it. If you have all those documents, it's really easy to look into, because the police report will have the name and number of the person who brought the child. They can call that person and say, is it true that you found this child in this location? Yep, okay, great. Then they can, call the social worker that's on the government official reports. Is it true that this, and this? Yep, it's true, okay. And then you talk to the orphanage. You have multiple people corroborating the same story. Now, what happens is, if that wasn't what actually happened, what it looks like is people will go to a third party, will usually go to families, poor families, and tell them, let me take care of your children, we'll take them to a school, we'll take them to a home, and we'll provide for your children. Or, there's international people who are sponsoring children in the school, let us take your children, they can go to the school and they'll be well taken care of. So the parents will allow that. Often, they're given some money and told that the sponsors are paying to have the children brought and that they're giving you some sort of bursary for their child. So really, really poor families will do that, not thinking their children are going to be abandoned or adopted, but they're just going to some sort of home. These third-party people, sometimes they work directly with orphanages, other times they don't. So sometimes the orphanage is aware of this, other times they literally think that it is an abandoned child. But then these people will be the ones to bring them to orphanages, and often orphanages are involved in it, and the orphanages will pay for the children. And the children end up getting money from the agencies in the country that are working with international agencies. So it's this big ring that's just really nasty. And so my advice to everyone is, our Canadian government needs to do what it's doing in investigations. So we can't harp on them for it, because there's a reason for them, because this is how the systems work here. But I really believe we need to be pushing that the government is doing this throughout the process. I mean, any adoption process takes years. And I mean, often a lot of it is getting the dossier together and whatever in Canada. And once that's done, or if you're an expat, even getting yourself together for the child to be released to you. But once the child you're either ready to be matched if you're doing it through an agency, or you're for your child to be released to you in Canada. Once you know the child that you are supposed to be matched with, there should be a point before that family goes to pick up their child or get a finalization of the adoption, or before a child comes home in an expat adoption, where that child's case, everything that they have, is given to the embassy that will be dealing with the adoption. And they should be looking through that. And any red flags that they have, they should be raising them before anything is finalized with the kids. Because here's the thing. That gives us time to get any proof, to really look into it and make sure that, oh yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we should look into that. Maybe that is weird. Or, we actually have proof for that. We just need to get the document from someone to show it, whatever. And then it sort of gives the government, the agencies, what they need. So that once the child's released, you know that it's just a matter of time for the citizenship. It's not a matter of if. Because now these children are bonded. Like, this little boy for the Morans is 100% adopted, and he's bound, and he's bonded to that family, and the parents are bonded to him. So now what's going to happen is he'll end up getting sent. He won't get sent back because the Nigerian government sees him as their child. So I'm not even sure what would happen if these accusations are actually true, which I don't really think they are necessarily because of how it's being stated. It looks more like someone's coming forward and wants maybe some money or sees an opportunity to benefit from this. But obviously it has to be looked into. But so if that happens, I'm not really sure what will happen with their little boy. But regardless, he's bonded to this family. And because it's taken months to get to this point, they're really well bonded. I mean, for us, our kids have been with us for almost 2 years. Should anything ever come up, we're still in the country. we are the ones that went through the whole process step by step by step. So we know, like, if you want something from the police, we know the exact police station to go to for both our kids. We know the villages that, or the area of the country that they were born in. We know the orphanages and the backstory. We know we were the ones working with the government officials, the probation officers for each case. Like, we know, it's easier when you're an expat because you've seen the system. It wasn't an agency doing it for you. So you know if there's a question, you know where to fill that hole and how to get the proof. And we also know without a shadow of a doubt the story of our kids because we literally fact checked it at every step. And we have multiple documents from tons of different people all saying the same things. So we are fully aware of that. But the thing is that should something happen, that like an expat who's been through this process and 2 years down the road and something does happen and they can't prove it, those children have been with them for years. They're their kids. Legally, nothing's changing that. And so I don't really know what would happen in that situation. And so to prevent that, what should be happening is there should be more involvement throughout. But the embassies who are already doing these investigations, just do them earlier instead of doing them after the fact. Do them earlier so that there's that confidence in knowing that the adoptions were ethical and that there wasn't any issues leading up to when the parents picked up their kids. But it also then gives the government that safeguard that they know that they've done their job. And then afterwards, there's not these months and months and months of waiting in country for all of this stuff to be done. They can say, okay, we've already looked into this. Let's just verify. Now the adoption orders come in. Yep, good, legal. Citizenship, granted. That's what every other country is doing, and that's what we need. That's what we need change for. But so we can't be yelling and getting angry at the government for this. Truthfully, they were kind of put under the gun. They had a lot of pressure on them to have this done by a certain time point. And so who knows if maybe their plan was to go into country to investigate it more, but they were getting a lot of pressure to expedite the specific case, and so maybe they weren't able to. I don't know the specifics, but I do know that when there's this expected length of 6 to 8 months minimum, it's hard for people, and people start pushing back on that. And then the government officials are going to start feeling pressure, and then they're not going to be able to do their job properly, and it just turns into a mess. And so, yeah, that's sort of my take. And as someone who's lived in this country for almost 3 years and worked very closely with the child welfare system, personally, as well as with our NGO and with our adoptions, we've seen the steps through this. I've worked in Ghana, I've worked in Kenya, I've worked in Uganda, and I've lived in Uganda. I know how these countries operate in the child welfare system, and it is sketchy sometimes. And so we need to be verifying all the documents and the details we're getting, and not assuming that just because we adopted from agencies back home that everything's kosher, because it often isn't, unfortunately, which is why there's all these headlines all the time about children being trafficked. None of these families are willingly doing it or even knowing about it or would ever think that their adoption fit into that box, but sometimes they do, and often they do. And so that's what the Canadian government's trying to prevent. But they need to be doing it earlier, because doing it like this, we're now, what do you do? The child's adopted, they're bonded, this is a family, and now they have no idea what they're going to do, because Canada's saying unless they can prove within 60 days the validity of all their documents from Nigeria, that they're not going to grant entrance to their son. So what are they going to do? It's a terrible situation, and it's a nightmare. It's literally the worst nightmare for any internationally adopted parents. But that's why something has to change. But I also think it's really important that us as adoptive parents take some of the responsibility immediately so that we can say, I am going to ensure that the details I'm being told are true. I'm not going to rely on the agency. I'm not going to rely on the orphanage. I'm going to do some of my own investigation. Hire a private investigator. Hire a lawyer. Hire people who know the system, that they can fact check stuff for you. There are people in every country that can do that very easily. So have someone do that so that you can be certain, and then you have documents that show other people outside the orphanage are corroborating everything that's happened, and then the Canadian government can be more comfortable with it as well. Anyway, this is a nasty mess. My heart goes out to this family. I literally can't imagine what they're going through, especially now that it's Christmas time. So I am praying that everything settles out for them and that there isn't any issues and that little boy can go home to Canada soon. But I also really pray that there is not a family that has been seeing their son in the media and with all of the high publicity for this case, that and they didn't even realize their son's adopted and they've seen him, and that would be heartbreaking as well. So I'm just praying that all of these accusations are false, everything's going to work well, and it's going to move smoothly, and that this family's going to be home. And then I'm also just praying that our government makes some changes so that this doesn't keep happening, because there's got to be a better way. Anyway, thanks for listening. I know it's another long one. I go on these rants. But yeah, let's keep working with our government and finding the best ways to keep making international adoption better and more accessible, so that people aren't deterred from it, because that is also one of the last things we want. We don't want people to have to be afraid of international adoption. We just want it done ethically, so these children we know that it's for the best interest of these kids. Thanks so much. Merry Christmas, everyone.